Hey, how's it going? It is Stephen here from understandingaudio.com, and today I'm going to be talking about guitars and bass. In particular, I'm going to be talking about how to balance your guitars and your bass guitar or bass elements of your mix using filters. So I'm going to demonstrate how to use this technique effectively on the chorus of a song that I recently mixed. Now, this chorus has a bass guitar on 2 tracks. I also created a third bass distortion track. It also has some acoustic guitar strums. It is an acoustic on the left and a double on the right. There is another distorted guitar part with 2 microphones, one on axis and the other off axis. And then finally, we have some guitar chords that I actually played in myself to thicken out the mix and add some width on the fringes of the mix on the far left and on the far right. So let's talk about why filters are so important when it comes to getting the balance right between your guitars and your bass parts. First of all, before you do anything else, like in every other mix, the most important thing to have right is your fader balance and your panning. Once your fader balance and your panning and also your gain stage are put together correctly, you can then make the decisions like I'm about to show you with the bass and the guitars in this mix to favor certain elements or certain frequencies for the various different parts. Let me play this section first so you get a better idea of the relationship between the bass guitar parts, the electric guitar parts, the acoustic guitar parts, and how they all come together to create this nice blend. All right, now talking about the bass. As I mentioned earlier, I have 2 main bass parts that came to me from the recording session. First, we have this bass DI part, then bass amp part, and this bass amp distortion part is a duplicate of the bass amp part that I have just added a Sans amp and an EQ to, and I'll get to that a little bit later. These 3 tracks, 1, 2, 3, are all bussed up to this all bass AUX or bus. There is a bit of processing going on this bus, and it's all to smooth out that bass sound to have it sounding consistent as we go through each stage of the mix. But first and foremost, I want to talk about the EQ and the filters that I've used. The first EQ up has 2 filters in place. A high pass filter at 52 Hz and a low pass filter at 7K. Why are they there? Well, I had a listen to the bass, and I had a listen to the bass in the context of the mix with the kick drum, and I decided that the best place to cut this was at about 50 Hz. Now why? Why am I doing that? I'm doing that so the bass and the kick drum don't have to compete for the same space. How did I come across this 52 Hz frequency, and how did I decide on this being the magic number? Well, I listened to it. With this brilliant FabFilter Pro Q, you can play back the part that you're listening to, and you can click this little headphone icon here, and that will actually just isolate the frequency that you're listening to, and you can move that filter to the left or the right, and you can hear how much of that frequency you want to cut out, and it's really, really great. But I haven't had this plugin all that long really in the grand scheme of things, and for years before I had this plugin, I was using this technique with the help of other plugins and stock EQs, all of that stuff, so you don't specifically need this EQ. First of all, let me just demonstrate what this does. So you can sweep around, find the frequency that is the sweet spot of where you need to cut this bass. Like I said earlier, I listened to this in the context of the whole mix first, but I just wanted to demonstrate to you why this filter is in place. If you're listening on an iPhone or, small earbuds and you're not listening on good headphones or monitors, you probably didn't hear that. So there's nothing wrong with your ears. You'll only really hear that on good quality headphones or on studio monitors. And now moving quickly on to why this low pass filter is here. It's for the very same reason. I really don't need anything above 7K in this bass part, and I want my high end elements to be the stars of the show in this frequency range. Now let's move on to these individual bass tracks themselves. First, on the bass DI, I have another filter in place here. And this is quite a drastic one. I'm cutting everything above 156 Hertz. Reason why? I want this bass DI track to handle the low end of my bass part. As I mentioned a few times now, there are 3 individual bass tracks. And this filter is in place so that for the bass DI part, I'm isolating only those frequencies below 150 Hertz and processing them and balancing them individually. So I need to ungroup these bass parts so that we can listen to them individually. So you can hear pretty clearly that when that EQ is on and when it's bypassed, you can hear a lot more of the frequency range of that bass DI track. On the bass amp, I'm doing something very similar, only that I have everything below 200 Hertz cut. So this bass amp track is dealing with everything above 200 Hertz. There's no other processing on this track. I just have the bass amp itself, the quality that's been recorded, the quality of that amp, the quality of the bass guitar and the player directly through that bass amp out through the microphone and recorded to be used as part of this mix. So let's hear what this filter is doing. So when it's bypassed, you hear a lot more of that low end below 200. When it's on, when it's engaged, you hear more of that sort of clicky finger movement, fret movement of the bass player. And I really like that because it sounds so natural. The two of them blended together just gives you this really, really nice bass sound. This bass amp distortion track, like I said, is a duplicate of the bass amp track. It's a duplicate of that audio. And on there, I've got the Sans Amp PSA, just adding some distortion. And then we've got another EQ, the very same EQ settings as we saw on the bass amp track. It is very simply a duplicate. I just wanted to add a little bit more distortion to this frequency range just so that the bass cuts through the mix. All right, so that's the bass handled. On the acoustic guitars, very, very same idea. Without this EQ on the acoustic guitars, I found that they sounded really clicky. I had too much high end, too much string noise. Clicky is a very technical term. And I put this EQ in place to cut everything above this 28703K mark to clear things up a little bit so that they didn't affect the high end, the cymbals, any other elements in there. They just were, it was too prominent with that in, and I'm going to demonstrate what I mean right now. So that's the acoustics on their own, and then in the context of the rest of the guitars and the bass tracks. So without that filter in, it's all a bit too much. It's just all a bit too in your face, too clicky, like I said. And with this filter in, it just clears those acoustic guitar parts up really nicely. On the individual tracks themselves, we have some more filters. So everything below 350 here is cut, and then everything above 12K in and around is cut as well. Same on the double. We've gone up to 376, and from 8683 upwards, all gone. So we're really doing quite a lot of filtering on these acoustic guitar parts to help them blend and fit into the mix and blend with the bass guitar and the other guitar parts. And now on to these two guitar parts. It's actually the same part with a microphone on axis and a microphone off axis. So what sort of filters have we got going on here? Cut everything below 228 and above in and around 12k. Now again, there's quite a lot of smoothing and a couple of stages of EQ and processing on this track, but these filters at the start really help to shape that tone and help it sit in the mix a lot better with all the other elements that you're hearing. There's not a massive difference with that EQ in and out, but what you will notice is that there's some of that kind of rumble that has been removed when this filter is in place. On the off-axis track, which I have panned hard right, last track was panned hard left, there are some filters in place once again. It's everything below 118 on this track and everything above 8782 in and around 9k. It's doing the very same thing, it's just that microphone is off axis and the other one is on axis. And finally, we have these guitar chords that I added in myself, that I actually played in. So these were recorded in straight through a DI, and on this track that's hard pan right, I used the CLA guitars to give it its sound, because a DI sound was just going to be clean. I then went back and added some filters, and again, this is really drastic. It's to help it sit in the mix. Everything below 120 and everything above in and around 2k is completely cut. Finally, we have this other part that's pan hard left. That was another DI track that I recorded through, and this time I used the Waves GTR. Again, there are some filters on this, everything below 143 and everything above in and around 5k. So let's hear these two together. First of all, I'll play you back the parts with the filters on and then with them off, see if you can notice a difference. Now you might notice there's not as much of a difference with the filters that are in place on these two tracks, and that's because I recorded these in and I tailor-made the sound to fit this mix. These were additional parts that I needed to add in to pad out the mix, so I had an idea of the sound I needed to create before I even played anything in. So as a bit of an A-B comparison, I'll now turn off all of these filters and play you back what this chorus would sound like without any of these filters in place. And one more time, just to refresh your memory, let's listen to the difference that these filters make to the balance of the guitar parts and the bass together when we put them on. Alright, so that's a pretty big difference. Everything just sounds more rounded and more balanced, and there's a lot more glue between the bass parts and the guitar parts themselves. Those acoustic guitars blend nicely with the electric guitars, those power chords blend nicely with the rest of the guitar parts, and the bass is just nice and round and smooth, and it just keeps everything moving along really well. Now, I used to really struggle to get the balance of my guitars and my bass to sound the way I wanted them to, and to a certain extent I still really want to get that sound a lot more perfect and a lot more balanced in the grand scheme of things, but that's something that will come in time. The great thing about this is that I'm drawing on my experience as a guitarist, playing in bands with a bass player and drummer and all of these crazy musicians, and bringing that into my mixing and into my mixing style. And that's something that's really important. Even if you've never played in a band, you have your own taste. You have your own taste in music. You have your own taste in the type of music that you like playing, that you like mixing, producing. And that's so important. And it's often really, really overlooked. And I want to help you with that. And I want to bring that out. And I want to help you develop your own mixing style so that you can demonstrate how unique you are and how you can stand out as a mixer. And to really fast track your progress, I have a guide for you that you can download today that outlines exactly how you can harness your taste to get your mixes sounding like the pros. So Stephen, how much does this guide cost? This guide is completely free. Yep, I'm crazy, but you can have this completely for free if you go to getpromixes.com, click the download button, and it's all yours for free today. I promise you that this guide is going to make a huge difference to your mixes and get them sounding like the pros in no time. So once again, don't forget to go to getpromixes.com and download the guide completely for free. Now, before I go today, don't forget to like and subscribe if you found the information in this video useful. And if you're feeling really, really super generous, leave a comment down below and let everybody else know what you do to balance your guitars and your bass. I'll be back with another video very soon. And in the meantime, have a great time making music.